And the way you can do that is by increasing the fixed costs. And that is to say, if you could have a large cost that somebody has to undertake in industry, then that is going to favor large companies over small companies. Suppose that you had to pay $1 million in order to be able to open a retail store. That is just going to shut down every small retail store. On the other hand, Walmart is not going to have a problem with that. They have $1 million is trivial compared to their total revenues. So if you have a large initial fixed cost, that is going to cause the industry to become more concentrated. Okay. Now, the point that I want to point out here is that regulation imposes high fixed costs. If there are lots of regulations, then you have to hire a bunch of lawyers, first of all, to figure out what you're supposed to do to comply. And secondly, of course, there are usually costs to complying with the regulations. And they tend to be fixed costs. So actually, this favors concentration of the industry. And as paradoxical as it may seem, it might actually be in the interest of the businessman to propose regulations that impose large costs on his own industry, provided that he's in a large business and they're fixed costs. It might actually be in his interest, because that is going to shut down his smaller competitors. And it might even be that that's the only way of shutting them down, because they might actually be more efficient than him. All right, so this is the last thing that the government might want to do to protect the special interests. That is to protect businesses against failure. Now, one example of this is FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The government insures bank deposits. So that means that if you're a bank, you put your money in the bank. If the bank loses it, the government will give you the money back. Now, this would be in your interests. If you put your money in a bank that was making risky investments, then you'd be glad that they had this. It's also in the interest of the bank. Why does this exist? My guess is it's more because it serves the bank's interests. So if you have this, then if you're a bank, you can make risky strategies with investing the depositors' money. You can do that and not fear that your depositors are going to leave you and go to another bank. Because the depositors don't worry about how you're investing the money because they know that the government is backing it up. So it's in the interest of banks that want to make risky investments to have insurance for the deposits. Another very famous example recently is, of course, the TARP bailout, the so-called Troubled Assets Relief Program. So this is where the government decided to buy a bunch of these mortgage-backed securities that, well, their price was going down because the market had realized that they were not worth much. Okay, so, and I take it it needs no explanation why that serves special interests. All right, now, this is about who is really the party of the rich. And my contention is that both parties are actually the parties of the rich. I probably don't have to argue the case for the Republicans, so I'll just mention about the Democrats. It is true that the wealthy often support Democrats, so there's a couple of statistics. People with incomes over $200,000 favored Obama over McCain by a margin of 6%. The 8 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the country voted for Obama. Now, by the way, of course, there are other statistics that you can take that show that wealthy people tend to support Republicans. It depends upon which statistic you look at. There are some measures on which the wealthy tend to support Democrats and other measures on which they tend to support Republicans. So I would say there's not that clear of a difference. Both parties do have pretty substantial support from the wealthy. The 2008 Farm Bill, which I was mentioning earlier with the big subsidies to the farm corporations, who supported that? The Democrats supported it 262 to 15. That's adding together the votes from both the House and the Senate. The Republicans also supported it 133 to 108. So there was bipartisan support for it, but notice that the Democrats were actually overwhelmingly in favor of it. What about the infamous TARP bailout? Who supported that? So the Democrats supported it 172 to 63. And that includes Obama, of course. He was a senator at the time. The Republicans were actually narrowly opposed to it, 91 in favor and 108 against. However, the supporters did include John McCain. So in 2008, if you wanted to vote for a president who did not support the TARP bailout, you were out of luck. All right. Now, conclusion of this section, special interest groups largely control the US government. I want to point out that the examples that I gave are just a few of many, many examples that could be given. There are probably thousands of examples that could be given. If you want to read more about them, I recommend this book, which I have depicted on the right here. It's The Big Ripoff by Tim Carney, published in 2006. He has lots of examples of how the government protects special interest groups, and in particular acts to try to get them more money, probably at your expense, at the expense of the consumers and competing businesses. All right, my second section is, why do special interest groups control the government? I think this is widely not understood, so I think this is a very important thing to understand. My claim is there are incentives that are built into our political and economic system that make this the case. So first we should look at, what are the incentives faced by businesses? Well, notice that a particular business might have millions of dollars at stake when it comes to a particular law. If some law is being made about a particular industry, the large corporations in that industry have millions of dollars at stake. They could make millions more if the law passes, or millions less if it fails, or vice versa. Also notice that if you don't hire the lobbyists to go to Washington and lobby for your interests, your competitors will. So it's almost like, well, you're kind of forced to do it. So the consequence is that big businesses know the laws that affect them, and they hire lobbyists to go and change the law, or to get people to write the law to have provisions that are in their favor. Now next, consider the incentives faced by the voters, you as an individual voter. The law is extremely complex. That's the first thing to realize. The 2008 Farm Bill that I was talking about, it's 663 pages of legalese. How many of you have read it? How about this? How many of you were aware of its existence before I mentioned it? Okay, good. That's a majority. Now this audience is probably more politically aware than most people, right? This is another thing. The Farm Bill that I just mentioned, it was only one of over 10,000 bills that were introduced into Congress in 2008. What percentage of those bills do you know about? Probably a pretty small percentage is going to be my guess. The Code of Federal Regulations, this is the book, or rather the multi-volume collection of books that details all the regulations that have been made by government regulatory agencies. It's over 150,000 pages long. Back in 1960, it was 22,000 pages. Since then, it has ballooned to over 150,000 pages. So, and just consider the incentives that you face as an individual voter if somebody suggests that you should be keeping track of the government and making sure that it's acting in your interests. Another thing to realize is that for each one of these laws, it only has a small impact on you as an individual. So again, just taking the Farm Bill as an example, that costs $40 per American. It's $12 billion to the farming industry, but it's only $40 per person. So, is it in your interest to work really hard to try to stop this? Would you send a lobbyist to Washington on your behalf to try and stop the subsidies? It's going to cost you more than $40 to send a lobbyist, right? So the consequence is that voters do not hire lobbyists, I mean the average voter, and they don't even know what's in the laws. Now, just for curiosity, how many of you know who your congressman is? You know his name? Okay. All right, it's a pretty good majority. How many of you can name some vote that he made during the last month? Okay, that was 2, 3, okay, it's a few people. Now this room probably contains some of the most politically engaged people in the country. If that many people, that's the number of people who know even one thing that the person did in the last month, what are the prospects for the public keeping track